Professor Hoon, Teck.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to speak on the Retirement and Re-employment Amendment Bill. This bill empowers the Minister to specify the prescribed minimum retirement age applicable to any class of employees, which must be at least 62 years, but not more than 65 years. Employers cannot dismiss their employees on the ground of age before they reach the prescribed minimum retirement age. Similar provisions are made for the re-employment age. The need to make such legislative provisions arises from the fact that life expectancy has vastly increased, and along with it, people can make choices on how to divide the gains in the number of years between work and retirement. The tripartite work group on older workers recommended that the retirement age and re-employment age be raised to 65 and 70 respectively by 2030, with the first increases to 62 and 68 in 2022. Evidence from several developed economies shows that an increasing fraction of people in their 60s have chosen to remain active in the labor force since the mid-1990s. Data from the Singapore Yearbook of Manpower Statistics 2021 show that for those in the age group 60 to 64 years, the male labor force participation rate increased by more than 10 percentage points from 2010 to 2020. For the age group 65 to 69 years, the male labor force participation rate increased by more than 15 percentage points. Corresponding figures for the female labor force participation rate for these corresponding age groups showed even bigger percentage point increases, although they remain below the male labor force participation rate. For the age group 55 to 59 years, there was also a significant increase in the female labor force participation rate. The question: what factors account for the rise in labor force participation rate of older workers in recent decades? First, improved health by itself does not explain the rise in labor force participation. This is because data of today's developed economies show that while the mortality rates at older ages have steadily declined during the past several decades, the labor force participation rate, especially for men, exhibited a U-shaped curve, declining before steadily rising since the mid-1990s. Instead, changes in the eligibility ages for retirement benefits and rules on disability insurance in the social security system in these countries seem to better explain variations in the labor force participation rate. As health has improved along with the increased life expectancy, people might choose either to work or to engage in meaningful activities that do not necessarily generate an income. Second, across education groups, those in more years of education have higher labor force participation among older workers. Those with a more rewarding career in the earlier phase of their life cycle are more likely to choose to work when they are older. As the share of our older population with tertiary education increases, this is likely to lead to higher labor force participation. Third, various factors, including labor-saving technological improvements in the household sector, such as household appliances, and more years of education, have led to a steady rise in labor force participation among women. The rise in labor force participation rate for women in many of these developed countries occurred earlier almost by a decade in many of these developed countries. By the early 80s, there was a relentless, steady increase in labor force participation rate among women. This may have the effect, this rise in labor force participation among women may have the effect of causing higher labor force participation among men if the couples agree to retire at the same time, a so-called working wife effect. However, if women bear the additional responsibility of providing care to their much older parents, this may discourage them from working in their late 50s to their mid-60s. So on the whole, there are factors that clearly have been at work, not just in Singapore, but in many developed countries, tending since the 90s to raise the labor force participation rate. But the main point, though, is that people now have an ability to choose how they will divide the additional years of their life between retirement and work. Finally, apart from the supply side factors which I've described, demand side factors will also contribute to the ability of the economy to create good jobs for older workers that will boost their job satisfaction and their participation rate. So Singapore's continued growth as a mature economy will be important in order to generate the demand for the skills of our older workers. Mr. Speaker, sir, as our life expectancy has increased, people have the ability to choose how to divide the added years of their lives between work and retirement. This is a very good thing. However, people finally make their choices. It is likely that the prescribed retirement age and re-employment age encapsulated in our legislation will need to change to reflect people's preferences. I support this bill.